Hello, this is Mr. Smith, and this is Academic Economics, and this is today's daily participation. Please click on Resubmit, and a text box will open up, and you can type in 3 significant things from today's lesson. So this is the labor market, and it's important to remember that in the labor market, we, the people, supply the labor. So this is kind of the opposite from all the other markets. If you were looking at silverware, makers of forks and spoons and knives, the businesses are the ones that supply the spoons, forks, and knives. But in the labor market, if you're going to work at that factory, you are the one supplying the labor. And so in the labor market, individuals are supplying, the households are. The demand is coming from the businesses. That silverware manufacturer is purchasing your labor. So you kind of picture all the people of the world are on the shelves at a store, the labor store, and the businesses, McDonald's, Walmart, IBM, Boeing, all these companies are coming in and they're grabbing some employees, putting them in their cart. They're purchasing their labor. So we are the suppliers, the businesses, governments, nonprofits, anybody who hires people are demanding labor. And wherever these two lines intersect is where we have the most efficient wage, the equilibrium wage. What we have to remember is we also follow the laws of supply and demand. So at a high wage, for instance, not a lot of employers. So if the wage is way up here, maybe $100 an hour, the quantity is going to be incredibly low of businesses that are willing to purchase that labor, that are demanding it. If the wage is really low, $1 an hour, then lots of businesses are going to be willing to hire you. And the same thing with the law of supply. If the price is high, supply is high. So if $10 or $100 an hour is the going rate, then lots of people are going to supply their labor. The quantity is high, it's way out here. And if the wage is really low, only $1 an hour, not a lot of people are willing to supply their labor. And so this efficiency point is where people are going to be, the suppliers that is, making the most. So this is their surplus. They're making more than all the other wages below that. And then the people that are demanding, the businesses, they are going to be saving the most because they're basically going to be paying less than all these wage levels up here. And so this area would be the surplus for those supply or demanding the labor. And this would be the surplus for those supplying the labor. And so we end up with an equilibrium wage, and that is the most efficient wage that can occur. And what kind of people are supplying labor? Well, that would be the labor force. This is made up of all people that are both employed, and of course, these are people willing to supply their labor, so it includes the unemployed. You say, well, that's pretty simple. That includes everybody then, doesn't it? Well, not really, no. And it only includes people over 16 years of age, so it doesn't include minors below that. It doesn't include the retired, the disabled, they can't work, institutionalized. People in the military aren't included in this because they can't readily supply their labor into the other marketplace. You could have just a labor market for those in the military, but they're generally not included in the overall labor force. If you're employed, you're counted as someone who's worked for 1 hour of pay within the last week. You worked 15 hours or more without pay, for instance, for a family business like a farm. And you've held a job but did not work due to illness, vacation, labor disputes, or bad weather. The unemployed are people that have looked for a job within the last 4 weeks. If they've gone beyond that and they haven't looked for a job within the last or longer than a month, so maybe it's the 5th week and they stop looking, they're referred to as discouraged workers, and they're no longer included in the labor force. So we only include those people and those that are willing to supply their labor, those that have been looking for a job within the last 4 weeks, the last month, and those that currently have a job. And that means that the total labor force is not the same size as the total U.S. population. For instance, there's over 330 million people in the United States, but the labor force only has about 164 million people in it at this point in time. And that number has been going down a little bit over the years, and that's because the baby boomers are one of the biggest age groups ever born, and they have been retiring. So as they continue to retire, unless there's more people either that were born and are 18 years old or immigrants coming into the country, that labor force will continue to shrink, which will drive up wages, which of course sounds good because the supply curve will be going backwards and moving back to here, which will mean a higher wage, but it also means that will cause businesses to not be able to hire as many people because it's less affordable. They won't be able to provide as much to the economy, and so prices will go up and inflation will occur. So that's why it's important to have a slowly expanding labor force. And then, of course, there are reasons why the labor force changes or it becomes more diverse when it comes to different types of pay levels. Why do some groups get paid more than others? And the American economy used to be based on manufacturing from the Industrial Revolution up until the 1970s or maybe even early 80s. And that was because we were manufacturing a lot, so there was a high demand. The demand curve would have been way out here. And so there was a high price for all those factory workers. But over time, we have done two things. One of them has been to outsource, which is to build factories overseas closer to where the products are needed or where the labor is cheaper. And of course, people get very angry about that, but that isn't where most of the jobs have leaked out to. Most of the jobs have gone away from those sectors because of technology. Automated assembly lines and other types of technological advancements have reduced the number needed for people in those factories. For instance, a steel mill 20 or 30 years ago might have employed 1,000 people, but today one could run with only 100. And that will continue to go down and down and down as more jobs are replaced with automation. And there are a couple of things that do cause employees to become more valuable. One of them is the learning effect, the theory that education increases productivity and results in higher wages. So the more people train or learn, the better they become. There's also the screening effect. This is the theory that the completion of college or other types of high-level training, like vocational education, or perhaps the military, indicates to employers that a job applicant is intelligent and hardworking. So both of those support the fact that the longer you spend preparing for a job, more typically the higher the wage will be. And that's also because less people are willing to do those things. And so because there's less people willing to do those things, you have the labor supply back further to the left, which means the wages will be higher for jobs that want those types of people. And because of the shifting economy, we now have a lot more people entering into the workforce that maybe only work part-time, or they're involved in temporary employment called contingent employment, where they're incredibly flexible, and so are their hours, so their labor demand, the demand for their labor isn't exactly that stable. And so earnings for people that do have all the extra training, whether it's vocation or people that have military experience or college, their pays continue to go up. While that middle group, which mostly in the past could go to work in factories and mills and mines, because of automation in particular, that demand for labor has declined. And so as that happens, we see the wages decrease. And then you have, of course, people in the lower tier known as unskilled or semi-skilled labor. Unskilled or semi-skilled labor are those that involve little or no training. Unskilled means they have virtually no training at all and only takes them a day or two to train them for their job at the most. So anybody could go in perhaps and do this job if it's not too difficult or dangerous. And then there are semi-skilled labor, people that can run basic machinery, basic turn on, turn off type of machinery, also requires little training. The next type would be skilled labor, and that requires a lot more training, and that might be some of these factory jobs that have gone away that have been taken over by machines. So we've had basically a pool of demand in the lower tier in unskilled and semi-skilled, and then we have a demand that is higher in the higher tier of labor, which is known as professional. And so that requires extensive vocational, military, or college education, and that is where we find one group of jobs, and then we find the other group of jobs down in the semi-skilled and unskilled labor areas. And so that has created a segregation of type into these two tiers, one higher pay and benefits, more stability, and then the other one with lesser pay, benefits, and stability. So those levels of labor, once again, are unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled, and then professional. Now, with that, of course, there are other things that can come into effect that change the labor market, and that would be hazards and danger and uncomfortability. And so one thing might be training, for instance. So for example, registered nurses have to get a lot of training. So there's a low supply. Notice how high the supply curve is here. So their wages are going to be higher than, for instance, hotel, motel, and resort desk clerics. They don't have to go to college for a specific training program, for instance. And so there's more people that are able to do that. And so the supply curve is way over here to the right. And so the equilibrium wage is much lower. It's a little blurry, but the wage for nurses on this is $44,840. And for these types of clerks would be $18,380. Then the other situation would be when it's hazardous. It might not require that much training at all, but because of the hazards that are involved, the wages might be a little bit higher because not as many people are willing to do it. Now, this one shows a relatively low wage, $13.71, but there are hazardous jobs that can pay six-figure salaries, for instance, because there's such a low supply of labor. But then a fitness trainer, that's not that dangerous, and so maybe you have more people willing to do that, and so the wage is going to be lower than the other ones you can see here. So we can map out why exactly people have certain wages based on supply and demand. For instance, this one up here might also apply to professional athletes and musicians and actors, because there's a low supply of people with that particular talent that everyone wants to watch, but there is a high demand of people to be able to watch that form of entertainment. So that's why those people receive higher wages. Are they necessarily harder working? No, not necessarily. And in fact, some of them don't require any training at all. There are plenty of TV shows on the air, for instance, where you can tell there are people that really don't have much talent, but people do want to watch them. And so because of that, they will have higher wages. Now, some of those people do have to work hard, like baseball players, for instance, receive a high wage, one of the highest out of professional sports. However, they obviously don't work harder than a farmer or a steel worker or a coal miner, and their jobs are dangerous. They could get hurt playing baseball, but once again, they're more dangerous than those other jobs. And so the reason why they're getting a high wage isn't because they're harder working or their job is more dangerous or because their job is important, because obviously farming is the most important because they give us food. The reason why they do get paid that much, though, is because there's a low supply of people that are able to entertain the public in that particular way.